Thank you so much for these excellent talks, Javier and Juan. I had one question about the impact of multi-species grazing, which seems to become more interest. How does that impact the welfare of the animal? Let's say if we mix cattle and sheep, or cattle and goats. Is there any research on that, Javier?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good point. And as far as I know, the mixing of a species has more benefits than problems from an animal welfare perspective. Part of these benefits come from the fact that animals in mixed herds or groups are better able to exploit the resources. And also there are some other more subtle advantages. For example, remember one of the welfare problems in extensive systems is predation. And there has been some work showing that particularly for sheep, the presence of bigger animals such as cattle may have a deterrent effect on some predators. And of course, again, all this is even more pronounced benefits because the diversity of a species provides a more enriching, diverse environment. So I think that from an animal welfare perspective, mixed species grazing has clearly more advantages than disadvantages.
Thank you, Xavier. I'm going to use my chair authority to pose a question while other people pose a question. So we are now here in New Zealand. We are too used to think that our animals, simply because they are grazing, they are happy and they are cool and everything is all right. But we are facing deserts of ryegrass or endless seas of lucerne. On overlap based on your work, Juan and Xavier, I find interesting results, but I may let some of my students to comment on that. So my question there now is, now we are heading back again to what we call diverse pastures, and intermingle sorts with several species there, which eventually can represent monotony as well. So I would like to know, or just hear from you, Xavi and Juan, what is your take on that? Do you think that, yep, I mentioned we agree on that monotonous desert of ryegrass or lucerne, impede, an animal welfare and well-being. But what about those multi-species pastures that are coming now?
Yeah, I think clearly that if one of the advantages from an animal welfare perspective, one of the advantages of extensive systems is diversity, and the fact that this diversity may cater for individual variability in needs and requirements, then everything we do to increase diversity and variability in the system will have a positive effect on animal welfare, at least in theory. So that would be my initial take on it. So diversity is one of the advantages, one of the strengths of extensive systems, and therefore anything that reduces that diversity may also reduce the theoretical benefits of extensive systems from an animal welfare standpoint. So that would be my general argument. Maybe Juan, if you want to elaborate on it.
Yeah, and I think that's something to consider, like even when I was talking about the islands, the concept will be eventually that will become also for animals that are going through time on these islands, they may perceive that habitat as monotonous, right? Because they go over, that's the issue, as I was mentioning, like the temporal scale over the experience of an animal in that context, and how potentially that's something that can be solved. And I think that's potentially true. As Javier mentions, that diversity is always going to be better than just a sea of grass or or legumes, but it may be possible, looking at going back to the idea of islands, is that if those islands persist, for a few years or a few seasons, and then that's the possibility of changing those islands again, or if we see those islands in patches, there may be the possibility that some of those patches may last shorter than other patches, so we can keep providing that diversity in a temporal scale relative to the because some of those mother cows may stay there for years. So that will be the other possibility. Another one is some that you mentioned. Is creating this sequential, particularly in these daily systems where you get this. I was showing you this guy that now seeds some herbs, and where those dairy producers are changing those, some of those, rejuvenating those pastures every, say, 4, 5, 6 years. That's the possibility there that create like a chain of movement of animals through those systems, and also changing the species as you rejuvenate those pastures. So that's something that in those 5 to 10 year plans that producers developed, create within those plans that throw in that chaotic type of effect where you just bring something that that is even novel to the herd. I think that's so that may be the potential thing that need to be considered beyond that what we presented today, I think.
Thank you, Juan. I don't know if Kona is present here, but I know Matt is present here, so we can share some of the results we've been having here. That when we present animals, indoors and outdoors, to what we call a more functional diversity, if you like, where the animals exert that from a size point of view, that capability to go from one place to the other, rather than struggling in just serving a bite without the option of picking one species to the other. The data we have shows that they perform better and they have a better welfare. But I may put it under the spot. Matt, would you like to comment something on that?
First, Juan and Javier, thank you very much for your presentation. It was really good, but also you two indirectly and directly have had, impacts on my positive impacts on my early career. So I appreciate that as well.
Thank you.
So I guess, especially in Kana's experiments, results would suggest that by providing choice between different forage species, we would improve their welfare, I guess. Providing a choice in between 4 different forage species, reduce their stereotypic behavior. And Juan, I know that you and Catanese maybe, but
yeah,
y'all have done experiments where you've measured cortisol and shown reduced cortisol by providing choice as well. And this kind of leads into a question that I have that I think you two would be excellent, or a great source to talk about what you think about this question or what answers you may have. But how do you measure welfare or well-being, and what markers can you have to get away from just measuring the absence of positive welfare or the presence of negative welfare and enter into measuring positive well-being or positive welfare? And I'll let you guys answer that one.
Yeah, if I may, I think your question is extremely interesting. Matt, as how we can measure this positive welfare in animals. And I think there is something that could be extremely interesting to be done. I mean, you have shown that when animals are given a choice, they seem to perform better, lower cortisol, less stereotypic behavior. That's great. I think the next step would be to show that they have a more pronounced positive affective state. And one of the paradigms that we could use perhaps in a possible future experiment is to look at what we call cognitive bias, meaning that the cognitive processes of animals and humans depend on our affective state. So when we are in positive mood, our cognition works differently as opposed to when we are in negative affective state. And we have several methodologies to assess that in animals. They have been validated in cattle, in sheep as well. And it would be, I think, a fantastic experiment to do, to see whether choice leads to a more positive cognitive bias than lack of choice. And as far as I know, this has not been done using choice in terms of food. So that's something to consider, Matt and Pablo and Juan, as a possible nice experiment that could be, I think, could add very interesting information on the actual benefits of providing choice to grazing animals.
That's great. I would like to, well, keep reminding, we got 2 minutes, and I will invite later on to Kona, put her under the spot to present, an experiment that she's been, she submitted to Journal of Animal Science on the choice over time or variety or diversity. So we can comment on that later on. But also some of the new experiments that we are running here about the influence in utero or early life in the animal welfare and well-being.